This passport program, these travel restrictions, and all of this other nonsense will fall apart when enough of us decide we will no longer participate in the madness. Quite simply, be the change you wish to see in the world. The Ontario government has announced changes to the medical passport system after a sudden escalation of Omicron cases and data suggesting it will be the dominant strain by next month. As a result, effective January 4th, Ontario will require people to use their QR code in the Verify Ontario app where medical passports are required. For those of you wondering, the QR code can be used digitally or by printing a paper copy, and they will be in effect indefinitely. Crazy how we went from a January 17th end date right to indefinitely, when on September 22nd, not even 3 months ago, Doug Ford said, "Let me be very clear. This is a temporary and exceptional measure. We will only use these certificates for as long as they are needed, not 1 day longer." Naturally, I needed to verify the severity of this Omicron variant, because if it is dangerous enough to justify indefinitely, this must be pretty serious. So, as of December 10th, according to the CDC, one jabbed person was hospitalized for 2 days, but there haven't been any deaths reported to date among the patients who have been followed by health officials. The most common reported symptoms of Omicron were cough, fatigue, congestion, or a runny nose. Even the witch doctor of the White House, the self-appointed king of science, Lord Fauci himself, said early reports of mild symptoms are encouraging, while the World Health Organization says the Omicron variant appears to be more contagious than the predominant Delta variant, though more data is needed for conclusive answers. So essentially, there are no increase in deaths, hospitalizations, or any legitimate concerns here. In fact, excess mortality is back to the same general rate as 2019 almost everywhere in the world. In other words, the pandemic is over. So what the fuck is happening here? Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Kieran Moore, said there could be a complete strain replacement in Ontario as early as January. This is obviously a baseless claim, but read between the lines here. It means that these things come and go as quickly as Canadian seasons, but the government will use each new variant of concern of an endemic to further implement totalitarian measures. And if you think it stops at bars, restaurants, gyms, and theaters, think again. Effective December 20th, medical passports will now be required for kids aged 12 to 17 if they wish to participate in organized sports at recreational facilities. In addition to this highly questionable approach, the province of New Brunswick has launched their Winter Action Plan, whereby malls, grocery stores, retail stores, and salons have the option of requiring medical passports from all patrons. However, if they choose not to enforce this, they must continue to enforce physical distancing measures. In other words, demand proof or limit your business's capacity and therefore ability to generate revenue. Dr. Moore also casually mentioned that the Ontario government will be reviewing the definition of fully jabbed and whether that should mean 2 or 3 doses. So it looks like it's booster or bust for all of those who can currently play freely within society. And if that wasn't enough, the director of the Ontario Science Table, Dr. Peter Juni, expressed his support for moving back to stage 3 of the province's reopening plan with stricter capacity restrictions in restaurants, bars, and gyms. So the Western world leading authorities say that there is no increase in deaths or hospitalizations. We have hazy data on transmissibility and compelling data to support that the Omicron variant is similar to a common cold. Yet our provincial government, with no scientific data or institutional support, is digging their heels in, strengthening the medical passport program, extending it indefinitely, adding a 3rd dose to the definition of fully jabbed, and considering rolling back into lockdowns, or at least limiting capacity in places where we already have to enforce medical passports. Can anybody spot the problem here? They're not even altering the components of these shots while this virus mutates. How is this an effective strategy? We are once again on a very slippery slope with Doug Ford at the wheel, driving us right off a cliff. If we say this is okay, even though we have adequate protection, our free will is gone. Let me say that again. If you have adequate protection against a relatively mild virus, and you accept that your government can force you to further inoculate yourself to fight the virus you already have protection against, just so that you can maintain basic rights within society, your bodily autonomy and free will are gone. It's not really debatable. I personally do not believe that it is safe to continually inject yourself with a drug that provides no adequate long-term data, all while you may have more than an adequate amount of the very protection these shots aim to provide. I mean, this is insane. We just can't let this happen. If this passport program is to continue indefinitely, we need to demand antibody tests as a means of receiving medical passports, or this gets very dark very fast. I mean, I've been pretty balanced on all of this, but I believe it's time for some friction here. These people, these political leaders and government officials have been dramatically wrong over and over again, yet they lead us to believe practical skepticism should be canceled, and that you either follow the narrative or you're crazy. But there's a big middle ground here, and I implore many more of you to begin filling this space. I believe it's time we drive a wedge between the credibility we give our duplicitous government and the fear our media is creating in supporting their deception. I know many people that have decided the booster is not for them. They feel they did their part took their shots and complied through this entire pandemic. And now they feel duped by a false promise. A promise our government made that this would all be over when 70% of the population had their 2 shots. And that this was the surefire way through the pandemic. This has now scaled to nearly 100% of the population, including your children, and a booster program with no end in sight. To double down on this narrative, our government has restricted travel and access to society for those who don't comply, yet the problems continue. We're told this is a pandemic, but we're firing last year's heroes, i.e. doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers en masse. A very counterintuitive move if this were in fact still a global health crisis. The narrative continues to fall apart from there, as our CMO now suggests that this will take 2 more years to get under control, and that these totalitarian passport programs are now an indefinite measure. The goalpost just continues to move, and with every move, the narrative gets more ridiculous. If you are one of the many, many people who don't agree with indefinite medical passports, who don't agree with an endless booster program, who don't agree with any further lockdowns, and who don't agree that the government can continue to move this goalpost, you are not alone. Every time the government demands 1 more inch, 1 more mile, 1 more act of compliance, we the people have a choice. We can give up more and more, or we can stop. This does not mean riot. It does not mean violence. It simply means you stop doing what they ask of you. In this case, as the booster program rolls out, you, like many, many others, can decide not to get it. And look, I am not a doctor, and this is not medical advice. I am not suggesting you shouldn't get it if you feel compelled, if you are at risk, or you simply believe it's the best thing for you to do. What I'm highlighting is for those of you who do not want to continue on with this endless cycle of boosters and bullshit, you can simply join the growing population who feel the same way. This passport program, these travel restrictions, and all of this other nonsense will fall apart when enough of us decide we will no longer participate in the madness. Quite simply, be the change you wish to see in the world.
How about new?